I love the situation that I'm in because I was chosen to live it. Honestly, I wouldn't wish being me on anyone else. But if there has to be one person that has to deal with the difficulties that I do, the struggles, just all the kind of stuff that society says is a bad thing, like, I really am glad that I am the person to do it. That the person that I am got to be in the situation that I came from. Because if you gave anyone else my situation without my resources, it could be a completely different outcome. But I don't consider this to be something that I cope with just because it's an everyday thing. You gotta make that choice. You gotta make the same decision over and over every day to be like, hey, I'm gonna be the best me that I can be, instead of being like, oh, well, this person can walk better than me, or this person gets better grades than me because they have a easier time doing these things. And I'm just like, yeah, but I think looking back, I feel like God was like, hey, he thinks too fast. We probably ought to slow his body down just a little bit, or bad things will happen. So it kind of just is this evening out in the spectrum where, it's like every time that I've wanted to do something that you could regret later on, it took me 3 times longer to actually do it. So I have no choice but to consider it before I actually do it. I'm like, let's not do that. So I think this whole mixed bag that is my life, everything just seems to balance out, just because I feel like everything about me that could be considered a negative thing was counteracted by either my living situation or where just how I go about things. And I think that's just the way my life is. I have cerebral palsy. It's a condition I was born with that the easiest way to describe it is it's a sort of inefficiency in my movement, because I have to, let's say you have to put 40 pounds of force to move a 40-pound object. Well, I have to put force forward to move my muscles, and then on top of that to actually do whatever I'm trying to do. So I have to be stronger than your average person to function at a lower than average rate. And I mean, that was really the most of my hardships were because of my disability. I grew up in a really small town. I never really experienced any negativity because of my race, just because it was such a small community. Everybody knew me. My dad coached basketball. All of my siblings played sports, and my mom was the coach's wife. So it was a small enough town where everybody knew everybody. Everybody knew who I was, and it was just a really great thing. And I mean, all of the hardships that I overcame were just stuff that I learned how to do because that's just what I chose to do, because I knew this was going to be a lifelong thing, and I don't regret any of it. My childhood was pretty great. Long story short, I was actually brought home as a foster child when I was 6 days old from the hospital. I was brought home from the hospital when I was 6 days old with my foster parents, and it was an emergency case, and it was supposed to be a weekend. A weekend became a week became a month, and month became years, and eventually they're like, hey, we should keep him. But as far as the thing about my family is, you wouldn't know the distinction of me being adopted versus my parents' biological kids. I mean, other than the fact that I'm black and they're not, but there was no difference in the love that I felt being in that family.
I gotta snap back to show that all I know is hope. God told me to go, so I'ma go for broke. Tell me to stop, I won't give in till my body gives out. Given the mission to live something different until all my insides are matching my out. That's right, I'm back on my route. It's time to walk my talk as long as I'm atop the rock and know that I will not be stopped. Try to not be shot.
I consider myself to be a Christian rapper, but even more specifically, a positive rapper. Like I said, rapping is telling a story in your own way, and it doesn't matter where you're from or what your situation is. Rapping is giving words to your story, and I feel like I have a very specific story that I can communicate. And one of my slogans that I've actually written a couple songs about is the concept of being constantly positive, because my disability is cerebral palsy, which is abbreviated CP, and I just turned that around into being constantly positive. And I think a lot of people in society likes to consider my situation something kind of negative or to be down about. And I have never once felt that. And I feel like there are people that look at me and expect that they are sympathetic towards my situation because they don't appreciate or value their own lives. And really, that's kind of what I like to communicate to people is I typically wear a hat that says No Hope, which is from one of my favorite bands, The Color Morale. The idea of just knowing hope and being hopeful in what you have and knowing that every day is something that is possible to enjoy no matter what your situation is.
Time's up. Go out and practice the habit, because if you want to take control, you gotta get up and grab it. Go ahead, take a second, just breathe. Sit back, relax, focus on what you want to be. Time's up. Go out and practice the habit, because if you want to take control, you gotta get up and grab it.
You know, instead of, looking like, hey, I can't do this or can't do that. Instead, I've learned to focus on the things that I can do. And a lot of people, I've been told, I've learned through the grapevine that some people think that my personality is a coping mechanism. And I want to ask them what they think I'm coping with, because I enjoy every second of my existence.